organization responsible for regional planning to achieve Southern California's unified environmental, transportation, and housing goals. This includes Connect SoCal, a $639 billion long-range visioning plan with more than 3,500 projects that expand land use and transportation strategies to increase mobility and sustainability in the region. Our guest has 3 decades of experience in regional planning, transportation in the United States. Please welcome with me Mr. Kome Ajise, Executive Director of the Southern Californian Association of Governments. Mr. Ajise, you are very, very welcome, and thank you for agreeing to be on the African Leadership Group, the Nigerian Leadership Series conversation this evening. Today, we're looking at Nigeria, Africa's transportation hub, possibilities and potentials. Maybe you should please start by giving us a little bit more insight into your background and how you found where you grew up, where you studied, and how you found yourself as the Executive Director of the Southern Californian Association of Governments. Maybe that might help us by way of starting this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that gracious introduction. Good morning, all. It's morning here. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you, Pastor Godalo, for that introduction. It's really a privilege to be here. I know it was a little bit of a scramble, but I'm really privileged to be here, and I just want to take a moment of personal privilege to give a shout out to my sister, Miss Akintela. Miss Akintela has been, at least for me, an example of patriotism. I don't know of anybody that cares more about Nigeria than Miss Akintela. Having met her in the mid 2000s, working on issues of Nigerians in diaspora and trying to connect back home. I come to you from Southern California. I'm right now in Los Angeles, where we're headquartered. The SCAG office is headquartered in Southern California. And as to my background, I was born in Lagos, but raised mostly in Ibadan. I love my amala and abula from having been bred in Ibadan. But I went to school in Lagos. I attended Lagos Baptist Academy. Baptist was my proving ground went all the way from Form 1 through A levels, upper 6, before going to the University of Benin. University of Benin, which we refer to as Unibest, was where I got into the area of planning. My degree at UniBen is in geography and regional planning, and always liked the subject of geography. The addition of the planning discipline was really one of those things that spurred my career, basically, in planning. After youth service and piddling around for a little bit in Nigeria, I decided to go for my graduate studies and came to California. I got my master's in city and regional planning at the California State University, Fresno. And from there became an intern at the Department of Transportation here in California, in Fresno, and worked as an intern. And I joke that I went to work for the Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation. We call it Caltrans. I went to work for Caltrans as an intern and did not leave for 29 years. And some would argue it's because I couldn't be employed anywhere else. I think it was because it was a very fulfilling place to have spent time and had a chance to work on so many different areas of planning, and ultimately was appointed as the chief operating officer of Caltrans by Governor Edmund Brown. Governor Jerry Brown was the governor that appointed me as the chief deputy director and in 2014, and I was in that position until 2017, towards the end of his term, which was when I decided to move south to work here at SCAG. And I've been at SCAG now for the last 7 years and loving it. It has been a really remarkable experience for me, working in the largest regional economy in the US, and getting to understand even more so. When I was at Caltrans, we had statewide perspective, and I always thought I knew everything about Southern California, but having spent 7 years down here, I am still learning about Southern California and how complicated and complex the economy of Southern California is. The SCAG region, as the pastor read in the bio, is if you were a country by itself, is the 16th largest economy in the world just by itself. And it's about half the GDP of California, a little bit more than half the GDP of California. So it's a very important region, even though it's only 6 counties out of the 58 counties in California. It does hold a very strong, unique position in terms of the economy of Southern California. In fact, for many reasons, the SCAG region is important to the state of California. And you know, in preparing the last couple of days and just thinking about what this conversation might need, I clearly want to be sure to stipulate that I haven't lived in Nigeria for the last 30 plus years, so may not be too familiar with the details and the basis for how things operate in Nigeria. So I want to apologize for that up front. But at the same time, I think as I was thinking about this, the geography of Southern California sort of lends itself to this conversation. In terms of the geography of Nigeria and what those possibilities and potential could be as a hub for, certainly for West Africa, but mostly thinking of it as a hub for the entire continent. So that's where I will come from in the conversation today. As we get into it, I'm hoping that we can cover at least 3 or 4 key areas of discussion. One is to maybe highlight some of the strategic, I was just talking about the geography of Nigeria, some of the strategic advantages that Nigeria brings to the table to serve as the hub. Maybe think about some of the modal transportation modal opportunities that may be of use to talk about as we think of the potential and possibilities, and of course think about some of the constraints that we may be facing in Nigeria, just again high level, and some discussion, some consideration about way forward. I mostly would probably benefit more from your questions and interaction, more so because I know what I'm going to say, and it may not be what you want to hear. So I think in the question and answer process, we hopefully can more tease out the things that are important to the conversation you were hoping to have. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions or before I get into talking about the strategic advantages of Nigeria.
Yeah. Maybe before we talk about Nigeria, maybe you can just give us a quick overview of how things operate transport-wise in America, maybe in California or wherever you operate from. How have they been able to, with the diversity, the expanse of land, and so on and so forth, gotten a reasonably decent transportation component to their economy, and what has been the benefits in terms of GDP and economic growth of that, and how have they been able to put it together and plan and do things like that? How come America has been really decent in transportation efficiency? Maybe a little bit apart from New York, where the traffic is something else, but even then, there's some kind of organization there. So maybe you can explain to us what you guys did right.
Definitely. There's no perfection here, I can tell you. The work continues. And in fact, I think for me as a planner and for those of us in the planning field, it's a full employment opportunity here to keep talking about it. And you would think that, when you think of the US being an advanced country, you would think that people relent on the planning, and that's not the case. There's constant innovation in thinking through how we might plan and conceptualize what that lofty future is. Our tagline at SCAG is innovating for a better tomorrow. And so we're always in the constant process of rethinking and updating our plans. So the regional transportation plan that we are charged with as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and just to clarify what that is, across the country, the federal government has designated Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs as we call them. And MPOs basically are super jurisdictional agencies that the federal government feels like is needed to coordinate between the various cities. A lot of our cities are charter cities, and they're sovereign. They can do basically anything they want to do within the parameters of state law and federal law, obviously. But they also have free reign on how they plan and do things within their various jurisdictions. However, to the extent that you need to expend federal or state funds, both federal and state government want you to be in a coordinated, comprehensive planning process. And so that's the job of the MPO. And so we do that for the 6-county area and the 191 cities. Now, the last thing you want is for a city to plan a road to go in one direction or to go this way, and the other city coming this way, and the roads don't meet. Now, being facetious, but that potential is possible on so many different levels if there's no coordination. And so the job of the regional planning agency, which we are at SCAG, is to try and make sure there is that level of coordination in thinking through how we plan. Besides that, there are issues that transcend any jurisdictional boundaries of a city or a county. Issues of air quality, issues of transportation, housing, economic vitality, climate change and sustainability. These are bigger issues than any one city can handle by themselves. Even the largest city in our region, Los Angeles, which has a population of about 4 million people. There are things they cannot handle by themselves. They need coordination with the rest of the region because, the jobs that folks that live in LA work at are not in LA, they're outside of LA. And so people have to travel to and fro. And of course, there are other resources that people have to travel to. So that's one of the basics of the transportation system in the US, and especially for us in California. It's the planning work that happens. And so we update the regional plan every 4 years. It takes us about 3.5 years to actually put the plan together because of the coordination with all of 191 cities and 6 counties. And then we pull that together with a board that's representative of all of these cities to identify what our priorities are. We have a freeway system that's sort of a legacy for us. It's been built over time that had capacity at one time. Most of that capacity has now been used up because we've grown in population with 19 million people in the region. So what then is the next phase? The next phase is start thinking about maybe a different mode of moving around. And so we've invested in regional rail and some more transit. And so all of this are efforts that are in coordination with all of our cities. And there is also the intentional investment of resources in areas that will continue to sustain the economy of the region. Our region, as an example, is home to the largest port complex in North America. So the ports of LA and Long Beach are the largest port complex in North America, and I believe they're the complex about the ninth largest port complex in the world. That is the gateway where you have a lot of goods and services a lot of goods coming through the ports and going through the rest of the country. That in itself accounts for a chunk of the economy of Southern California. And so it spurs a lot of other ancillary economic activity. You want warehousing, and more importantly, manufacturing. Manufacturing wants to be close to market, and sometimes market is export. And so being close to the port. So these are some of the things that are inherent in the system that we have. It's really rooted in planning. And the plans are approved by both federal and state governments, and those plans then are executed. So you plan the work, as we say, and then you work the plan.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I like to assume that federal and state governments really cooperate together to work these plans. And it's not like in Nigeria, where if you're a Democrat and you're a Republican, then you start to quarrel with one another and restrain resources and withhold funds and all that kind of thing.
Well, that happens here, Pastor. That happens here too.
It happens too.
Oh, yes. We've seen a cycle of funds being withheld by a different party. That happens. That's just normal politics.
That's politics, yeah. Right. So how do you overcome that? How does that affect that coordination and that planning that you've been talking about? Because we're having issues in Nigeria. Some states say that this road is federal, don't go there. Some states say it's a state road. Sometimes they say it's a county road or local government, as we call it in Nigeria, blah, blah, blah. How do you overcome all those things?
Well, I think a lot of it is ultimately the constituency that you serve are common to all. So federal government, state government, city government, all are serving the people, and these folks are the ones that vote. And so ultimately you are connected to the same constituencies. Now, it may not be obvious when you're trying to get, when there's, politics being played and funds being withheld. Over time, though, what you find that a lot of our regions are becoming self-help. If you go back 30 years ago, we were all dependent on the federal government for resources. And easily 70 to 80% of the resources that we had in building our transportation system, in maintaining the system, came from the federal government. Today, if you look in our regional plan, the proportion of funding that comes from the federal government is in the 15 to 20% range. And the local funding that's in our plan, so our current plan that was just adopted this year is over the next 25 years is $750 billion. 65% of that is locally generated funds from sales tax revenues. So we have measures that are approved by the voters of our counties that have determined that they want to build these projects. They can't wait for the state, they can't wait for the federal government. And so they identify the projects that are important to their communities, both for economic development and also for air quality basis or just for access to opportunities. They identify those projects in their local measures and they vote for it and approve it. And that becomes a source of revenue. In fact, in the state of California, the counties, there are about 20, maybe 21 counties now out of the 58 counties that have sales tax revenues that come in. And these counties together account for more than 80% of the population of California. So the ones that don't have sales tax revenues are mostly rural and smaller counties. And that's important. And that's how a lot of projects get done. And so in the end, you're not as susceptible to the vagaries of national politics in terms of your funding if you have self-help. And that has been one of the maybe unique opportunities we've had to move projects in our region. And also, federal monies and state monies require you to match them. So the federal government never gives you 100% money. They give you 80% money mostly, or 88% in some cases. You still need a match, and that match comes from your local resources to be able to attract federal and state monies. But it's ultimately back to planning. You have to know what you want to get done to be able to then ask the voters to tax themselves to fund those programs that you want to get done.
Okay, let's now come back to Nigeria, and let me get your thoughts on Nigeria. I know you said you've been away about 30 years, but I'm sure you've come in and out.
Yes, I do.
You do hear about things in Nigeria. The first question about Nigeria is, by your name, you sound like you're from Delta, but you grew up in Ibadan. Maybe you can speak to that just for my information. But more important about Nigeria is if you are president of Nigeria or minister in charge of transportation, how would you address our transportation problems, and what would you advise us to do, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, to bring whatever we're doing up to international efficiency standard rates?
Oh, yeah, that's that's a PhD thesis that you just laid on me. In terms of my background, my name is an Isoko name. It's Ogene Kome, and from Delta State. My people are from Otoyede in Isoko, and again grew up in mostly in Ibadan. So I knew I was going to be embarrassed to say at some point that I can't speak Isoko, but I speak Yoruba. Not embarrassed to say that I speak Yoruba, but I can't speak Isoko. And just to that point, my mom is Yoruba, and so we have a sort of a intertribal relationship that led to the mutt that I am. Being the president of Nigeria has to be probably one of the most difficult things that the Lord could assign you on this planet. We have such a diverse population, such a diverse nation, that things tend to pull in so many different directions. Not unlike what you see in the U.S. I dare say that our region, Southern California region, the SCAG region, is probably the most diverse region in the world, because there are hundreds of languages being spoken here, and people are from all over. And yet, we find common ground in trying to manage. I think the first thing, and again, I apologize up front that I'm going to be speaking like somebody from abroad, trying to tell folks in Nigeria how to do things, which I think is always a very dangerous thing to do. I think our issue in Nigeria, without question, we have the potential, is trying to figure out what is in the national interest. I'm not sure that we've fully boiled down what we understand to be the national interest. And when, I was really enamored by this topic of how we could be the hub for the continent. Because when you stop to think about it, why not? Just by virtue of the blessing of geography, we have the potential of being able to be that hub, because we're situated right on the ocean, and no different than what we have here in Southern California, where we have port access and we're not landlocked. So because of that, we become a resource to the landlocked countries around us as a matter of location. So we have that locational advantage as Nigeria. So when we think of what the national interest is, obviously it has to be about what will bring rapid benefit to the people, what would raise the level of our well-being as a population. And part of what is important to our well-being is to be able to generate the economic activity that will ensure that there is employment, such that there are resources to then be able to do the things that need to get done. We have to be very intentional and mindful about that. Now, I talk about 21 counties in California taxing themselves to do their projects and not waiting for the state and federal government. That's important because those counties have the employment base that allows people to pay that extra on their sales tax that goes to transportation. And if you have a really high level of unemployment and folks are not working, then you're not going to be able to get that same tax base to fund the level of projects that we're talking about. Just within LA County alone, the LA Metropolitan Transportation Agency, LA Metro, has a program right now that's the largest in the country to build rail systems. It's about $40 billion that they have programmed to do that. That money is mostly coming from sales tax revenues that has been levied on the folks in the county. And those resources will come in over time. And those projects then get built over time. And that's important. That then allows the area to be able to attract other economic activities, staging ourselves for the 2028 Olympic Games, the 2026 World Cup. These projects have to get done. And the only way they get done is because you have resources that are identified and hopefully additional resources from state and federal government. So you help yourself first, and then you have the ability to be able to draw in more resources. So in the case of Nigeria, I think I see us needing to think about everything from the standpoint of how we turn around the economy such that there is self-generating resources to be able to do things that will elevate the well-being of the people. Creating economic opportunities, I think, is very important, but really more important to that is having a transportation system that works. And there are three areas that we always talk about as needed, and I think anytime two Nigerians get together, these things always come up, whether here or back home. Is we need to have a working transportation system. We need to have a reliable power system such that we can then spur industrial growth and, of course, healthcare. These are the things that make for the well-being of the population. When you think of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway as when it was first constructed, it created some level of economic activity between Lagos and Ibadan, where people could actually commute on a daily basis without fear of delay to get to work in Lagos and still be able to go back to Ibadan and chill. We don't have that reliability anymore. I've done this. I travel. I always go to Ibadan from Lagos because my mom still lives in Ibadan, and so I go through the delays that are endemic on that corridor today, and we haven't had a chance to expand it. There are other corridors across the country like that have to be a higher priority, such that it creates access to opportunities and begins to generate economic activity. So trying to lay out a transportation system, developing a master plan for a transportation system, which I know we have. It's not something that needs to be dreamed up. The connections are there. The Kaduna Abuja connection, the Benin Shagamu Expressway, connections across the Niger River, connections, the road that's been contemplated along the coastline. These are all elements that are important, but how do we fund them? How do we pay for them? Is part of I think the magic that needs to happen. And as we build out our system, it puts us then in a more advantageous position to be able to say, we want to be a hub to the rest of the sub-region, West Africa, or in fact, the entire continent. And I'll give you one classic example of how that has been to the benefit of California. With the port system here in Los Angeles, being the largest port complex in North America, we have competition with the Port of Houston, the Port of Savannah in Georgia, and of course, the New York, New Jersey port complex. These are all competitors to the Long Beach, Los Angeles port complex. So the location advantage that the LA ports have is we can move goods between LA, the Port of LA, and the East Coast faster than ships can go around the Panama Canal to get to the East Coast coming from Asia. And maintaining that competitive advantage is only because we have a rail system that moves the goods from LA to Chicago and then transloaded and shipped to parts east. And so having that land bridge and the location advantage and being able to get goods, days, even a week faster to the East Coast of the US is an important location advantage that allows us to be the hub that we are in Southern California. And that then has led to other related industrial development. So we have in Southern California, the largest manufacturing region in the country, because manufacturers want to be close to the source of material and also the market. And so LA, then the LA region has manufacturing more so than most people would imagine we have here. And we have the largest warehousing complex in the country with almost 42 million square footage of warehousing in the Inland Empire, just east of LA, where goods are stored and distributed across the country. So these are the kinds of things that I think are scalable and replicable. In our case in Nigeria, is where we look at the transport system, create parallel options and modes in terms of having, the trunk lines built out, having the rail trunk lines built out to move goods even longer, and being able to create the opportunities that can come from that. I think the other thing that we have going for us in Nigeria that maybe, we talk about it, but we don't fully take advantage of it. And this is why it's such a natural for us in terms of location, and our population is a huge market. It's a huge market that cannot be denied for anywhere things are produced. Nigeria has to be a market that you want to tap into. And being a market then allows you to attract the connections to those economic activities that want to come play in the market. LA has a population of 4 million, the county is 10 million. That's in part because it is also a market. Most of the goods that come in to the ports, a lot of it actually stays within our region, and most of the truck activities that we see in our region stays within our region because those goods are moving and serving the market that the LA region is. So I don't know that I fully answered your question in terms of being the president, because I just can't imagine what that would feel like, other than we need to have a transportation strategy. We need to be able to identify the intentionality behind what we want to be, what we want to work out, which is the well-being of the people. And the well-being of people depends really on being able to have the resources to take care of the basic needs of education and health, for example. And to pay for that, you need the economic activity that comes from having a well-apportioned transportation system that serves the economy that we have. We have resources that need to get to market. If we don't have the transportation system to move those resources to market, we're not necessarily connecting to the potential that we have in raising, economic resources to build things that our people need.
All right, very good. I think you can speak a bit deeper and further on the transportation hub possibilities and potentials of Nigeria. I know you've said that we're right there by the Atlantic, we're well placed, and we're all that and all that. But what are the critical elements that we need in Nigeria to give us this transportation advantage, and so on and so forth? And from where you stand, what do you think are the problems and the challenges of having an effective transportation system in Nigeria at the moment?
I think the challenges, all of us can come up with, a litany of issues that are challenges. I think security is one of the things that we need to keep in mind, and I say it up front so that we don't have to dwell on it. It's just there, and it's the elephant in the room sometimes. But in terms of developing our transportation system, we have the potential is high. Beginning with the ports, for example, that we have, the port complex, the Apapa Tinkan port complex, the Lekki port complex. We have ancillary ports along the coast in the Delta and Calabar. These are all opportunities that can be scaled and grown to become economic hubs in of themselves. You would notice that some of our ports, and we see that here, have manufacturing right at the port complex. Those are job opportunities. In terms of the land surface transportation, we have population centers that have to be connected, and they have to be connected in a way that allows for free flow of goods and services. But we can talk about all the things that we need to do. It starts with having an effective governance that's also strategic in thinking. I think we don't spend enough time figuring out what we need and why we need it, so that we can be compelled to make sure that we're relentless in getting to that point. And so that's really the basis of strategy. We have, if you take our port complex, for example, it's underdeveloped still for the size of the population that it serves. And so it's not really ready to then serve the landlocked countries like Niger and Chad and even parts of South Sudan, for example, and the other countries are even along the coast. We can't claim that we want to serve those because we don't have the capacity to move goods in and out of our ports yet. So working on that element requires us to understand that this is a basis for generating resources that allows us to do other things. And so you have to invest in the system. And investing in the system also means maintaining what you already have. Having roads fall apart and economic activity grind to a halt because we can't get goods back and forth. I think it's an endemic problem that we all see happen to us in Nigeria. The road network connecting the key major population centers is important. The secondary and tertiary roads are also important ultimately to get goods to market and to get people to economic activities. When we think of the road network, if we don't have our roads, our network built, it's really hard for us to then connect our roads to a network that will serve, the ECOWAS sub-region or the African continent, as it were. We have a free trade zone that was created with the African free trade, the Continental Free Trade Agreement that was signed. That's an opportunity that allows us to trade freely amongst African nations. It's a unique opportunity for us to get our act together and build a system that can be the basis for taking advantage of this free trade zone. There's a reason you have economic unions like the EU. There's a reason why we have the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico. These are location advantages to make sure that trade is free between contiguous locations or jurisdictions like we have on the continent of Africa. You have in Africa a potential GDP that's bigger than Europe in the very near future. And for us to not begin to think strategically now about how we lead that and take advantage of it, I think would be ill-advised. When you think of again, I mentioned the road system, you have to also think about rail connectivity, because that's your long haul capacity to move bulk material across. And I wouldn't stop at just road connections to the other countries, but also rail is an opportunity. Aviation is one of the burden areas we have in Nigeria, and it cannot be overlooked because it does allow for rapid connections of different parts of the country for economic travel, for business travel, but also for high value cargo. And so having the airport system built to handle that is also a potential. And one key element of the air travel business that I think we're missing out on right now is the hub system that is endemic in air travel these days. If I'm flying from the US to Nigeria and I fly Lufthansa, they would always take me to Frankfurt first. And I might, lay over there or maybe stay there. But that's a hub. Same thing, KLM will take you to Amsterdam. British Air will take you to London. These are hubs that have been generated. Having that kind of a hub system, whether it's a national carrier or engendering our local entrepreneurs that are building on air travel right now in Nigeria, to be able to have that capacity to hub in Nigeria, then serve as a regional hub where if you're flying to anywhere in West Africa from other continents, Nigeria is the stop before you then have the little plane that jumps to Ghana or to Ivory Coast or these other places. So being able to generate that, I think again, it's planning, it's strategic, it's intentionality that requires. And then let me stop with let me go back to the port, because I think in terms of being a transportation hub, the port complex is absolutely your foundational element. The roads are important for us as a nation to move people around and have access to things, but for us to serve as a hub internationally, the port becomes very critical. Having the port be able to, there is consolidation that's going on right now in the shipping lines. A lot of the big shipping lines are forming alliances, not unlike the airlines are forming alliances. So, if you're flying Delta, you might find yourself on an Air France plane because there's an alliance between those two airlines. The same thing is happening in the shipping lines where there's consolidation. And they're also building bigger and bigger ships. And so your port has to be able to handle, a ship that's carrying about 18,000 TEUs. TEUs are 20-foot equivalent units. That's the size of the average container. And so when a ship is carrying 18,000, 20,000, even now 24,000 TEUs, they need a big place to land. And they want to then come into a hub port that then distributes those goods, so they're not stopping at every single port. So a ship coming from Asia, for example, doesn't want to stop in Oakland or Seattle, Oakland, and then LA. They want to come to LA and hope that things will then get moved to the rest of the country through LA. And so we've had those big ships be able to come into the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles as a result. So creating that unique opportunity allows us then to begin to be strategic about how we might be the hub for the sub-region of West Africa or in fact, the entire continent. And what comes with all of that is employment. You know, our port complex in Los Angeles accounts for, and I know my chief economist will cringe when I say this, and I say it because she hasn't proven me wrong yet, accounts for about a third of our economy when you look at the direct and indirect economic activity, the direct and indirect jobs and economic activity that come from those ports. So having that port complex leads to an industrial base. It leads to a logistics base, and you become a part of the global supply chain system where people want to come through here or come to here, Lagos or the Lekki Port Complex, to then establish a sort of a beachhead for the market that Nigeria is, and be able to serve it and generate even more economic activity as a result.
All right, we're going to go into questions and answers now, and I'm going to be asking Jumoke to please take over, or Sonny to take over and coordinate the question and answer session. And I'm sure quite a lot of people have questions. So Sonny may have one or two things he wants to ask you, and I'll ask him to take up from there. Thank you very much. It's been quite engaging and enriching, and I'm hoping that somehow or the other, we can find a way to really solve our transportation issues in Nigeria, which is really, really slowing down our economy, our GDP, everything. It's really, really putting us in a bind. But do you think we can raise funding? This is my last question to you. How can we raise funding to attack our transportation issues in Nigeria? And how have you in SCAG or California been able to raise your funding other than taxes and things like that? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think, again, government can only raise money either by borrowing, but then you have to pay it back. But to pay back, you got to then raise taxes or levies. So government really has very limited opportunities for raising money. It's either a tax or a fee or a levy. And you can borrow against future collection of taxes. But one of the other areas where we get resources is the private sector. Having the potential of engaging the private sector in a public-private partnership is maybe one of the more overlooked potential of how you generate resources to build your capacity and your infrastructure. I've had the privilege of working on P3s in my career here in California, and it can help you build what you didn't have capacity to build because your resources are not coming in fast enough to build $1 billion project, for example. And so having private equity come to the table and being able to find the value in participating, I think it's something that we have to be able to also provide as a government in Nigeria to those private entities. Now, of course, as a developing country, we have access to finance facilities. They always with strings attached, and so one has to be careful. But those can also be used very judiciously to leverage other capacities, both in the private and public sector. So there's no real magic about how you raise resources. It's from taxes that are collected, it's from levies. It's also from economic activity that then has this multiplier effect, because the more economic activity you have, then the more likelihood that you'll be able to generate resources from those economic activities that you've invested public funds in to basically gin up within the economy. So I think having the mindset that if we invest our tax dollars, that it would create economic activity that then generates even more tax dollars that allows us to continue that process. I think is one important cycle to keep in mind. And it's that simple. That's how it works in most of, at least here where I work. There's no real magic to where the resources come from. I think the big one is the private equity, but private equity is only able to participate to the extent that there is some assurance of stability and predictability, that they can make some profit out of it, which is because it's not a charity. And so being able to create that environment in which we have the stability that folks want to invest on the private sector side, I think is an important component of the future that we're looking at.
Sonny Jumoke.
Thank you. Good evening again, and thank you, or good morning. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for doing this. I have one question, and I'm going to ask anyone in the audience who has a question to please go ahead and raise their hand. So the way we usually do this is we'll take three questions together, and then you can respond to all three, and then we'll take the next set of three questions. But my question, I know back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, a group of Nigerians in the diaspora across the world came together to form this transportation working group. And I know you were part of that. Whatever happened to that? Because the brilliant minds of Nigerians outside the country and what they've been able to do, we talked about reversing that brain drain. If you could speak a little bit about that, and then how can we kind of bring that back again to see if you talked about the planning and how we can work with maybe the government or the private sector to implement some of those things that you've been able to do outside the country.
Oh, thank you. I remember that now with some pain, because it was my cousin Richard Choyombo was one of the people that spurred that, and you know this, but most people don't know. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out where to begin. And I think the approach at the time was to pick one project and see if we can be successful in one project, and then use that as an example of what can be done. And we worked on several projects, but then we were looking at the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, how we could make it into what the potential of it is. We looked at the Benin-Shagamu Expressway as another potential, because it was perennially had lack of maintenance and things to that. And so working on the basis for how you take an existing piece of infrastructure and make it durable over time was one of the things that we're working on. What happened to it? I think it was frustration. We just could not get, if you remember vaguely now, we just could not get traction in having conversations with folks in Nigeria. And I understand, when you're in government, and I've been in state government, you're busy trying to execute what the chief executive's objectives are. It's hard for you to then look to see, who's bringing ideas in, because, a government comes in with their own ideas, and that can be predominant. But I think, again, the Nigerian factor was, quite frankly, what led to a lot of frustration. You just could not get any audience, in a true audience. We had some audience, but not one that was effective in moving issues forward. I think that capacity still exists. I think there is enough brilliance in Nigeria to get done what we need to get done. What we need is and I say that with due respect to those of us that are abroad and working within advanced economies, that there are capacities, intellectual capacities within Nigeria to get done what we need to get done. It's really a matter of leadership and focus on where you begin to eat this elephant that we're talking about. Where's the first bite, and which projects do you take on? I know the current government the previous government worked on the rail system between Ibadan and Lagos. And there's rail now in Lagos. These are things that are baby steps that we're taking that I think can begin to show that the potential and the possibilities there without necessarily bankrupting the country by taking on loans from foreign governments that may not be advisable to do this thing. So yeah, the potential of being able to get back to having a conversation about what needs to get done, I think is always open. The question is, do we have the leadership that is committed to implementing it, and how do we make sure that it survives change in government? And I think that's one of the, maybe I think Pastor Iguodalo asked earlier on about how do we make sure things stay in, how do we here ensure that things get done over time? Part of it is the structure of planning that we have in place. As a metropolitan planning organization, I'm not beholden to the governor of the state or the president of the country. We just do planning at the regional level. Our plans are consistent with the needs of the folks in the SCAG region. And whatever government of the day comes in, whatever resources we need from them is to fund our plan, not necessarily play to what they want. Now, we might switch a little bit to programs that they're offering, but everything is predicated on this regional plan that we update every 4 years.
Thank you. And there is an opportunity, like SCAG does coordinate with Northern Cal, for example, and other regions. So one last question, and I see 3 hands up. COMTO is more or less an independent agency. It functions in that capacity and also supports the government. So how would that work in a place like Nigeria, where it becomes more an institution that outlives all these different governments? Maybe that's something that we can look at how that an organization or agency like COMTO can be established.
Yeah, no, I think COMTO is a great NGO that looks at transportation from the perspective of the minorities, for example, and their role in transportation. I don't serve, but I belong to COMTO here in Southern California, and we do coordinate not only within Southern California but across the country, comparing notes about what are we doing that is serving the interest of the people in terms of transportation specifically, which is what COMTO does. Yeah, so COMTO is an example of where you have the opportunity to share best practices, the opportunity to provide leadership or to train younger folks in leadership, and then allow them to get into government positions to do the right things. So I think that potential, is actually very important for us in Nigeria, to create a non-governmental organization, an NGO that becomes like a pressure group, but also a source of imaginative leadership that allows us to help folks in government to be able to think through some of these intentionalities that we need to create the opportunities necessary.
Thank you. And I'm going to challenge you to look for those old files from 2020 or 2020 something, 2004, 2006.
2005, yeah.
2005. I'll dig through Faye's files too and see if I can still find.
If you can find your file. Yeah, if you can find your file, send them my way.
I will. Okay, thank you. So Auntie Yemisi, I'm going to go ahead and take you. Please go ahead and ask a question. We've asked you to unmute.
Yes. Hello, Jumoke. Oh, wow. Looking lovely as usual. And our wonderful guest has been giving us some bites of hope, which hopefully will not be dashed if we do go ahead to adopt some of his recommendations. But my questions are, I'm working at the local government level now, having become frustrated at the state and federal and international frameworks that exist. And I just would like to ask you, our dear guest, about the issue of local government collaboration and resource mobilization, which is where I'm interested in. How do you see that working in Nigeria with the local government autonomy that's law that's recently been passed? Do you see our own local governments having the capacity to harness and collaborate enough to find the funds and implement the way you have suggested? And you spoke about other areas of harnessing resources apart from sales taxes. And you talked about levies, PPP, private equity, and we're thinking of municipal bonds. I want you to please speak a little bit more about that and those other areas. And lastly, what accountability mechanisms do you have over there to ensure that the funds are judiciously spent? Because we find that one of the big challenges of our implementation frameworks is how do we account? How do we ensure that corruption does not eat up whatever funds that are out there? Doctor, I think it's doctor or professor, I'm not sure. We are going to give you a chieftaincy title before you leave this forum. Ajishe, thank you so much for your brilliant presentation. Thank you. I'm Miss Yemisi Ransom Kuti, by the way.
Thank you,
for coming to
Ms.
the
Ransom
program.
Kuti. Thank you. Yeah, just Mr. is fine. I think having guardrails for accountability is so critical in the public space, and I have lived with it. Now, when I worked for the state, when I was at Caltrans, the State Department of Transportation, our program was easily, by the time I left, it was about $14 billion annually. Operating budget was about $2 to $3 billion. I was the chief operating officer, the second in command, and I could tell you that I never signed any contract. I didn't see any of that. I just need to know that processes are going forward, because the structure is such that there's no oversight, there's no direct control over how funds are moving, in terms of there's objectivity in the process. So bids go out, and Ms. Agatelo can attest to this because she deals with the same thing. A project is proposed, it goes out to bid, the bids I had, it's let, and then the bill, you oversee the project, and they submit bills. Who they submit the bills to is not the COO. That's not who sees it. I don't even know who's bidding until the bids are open. So there is some of that I think we need to develop a culture of doing that separates chief executives and executives from the flow of funds, such that there is less accountability. So we can build some accountability into it. But even before we get there, and I want to get to your question about local government, because I think that's where you begin to create the probity and the objectivity and the accountability that's necessary. Local government is where the tire meets the road, and it's the place of the highest opportunity to impact people. And the autonomy legislation that went into place, I think, is God sent. This is what you need. It's very much like, I think it's getting closer to what it's like to be a local government in our region. Our local governments raise their resources from property taxes, from income taxes, from various opportunities that come to them. And they use those resources to maintain their roads and build facilities and opportunities for the people that live in their city. They also look for funds from outside, from both federal and state, but then it's all within the context of the plan that the city's already developed for itself. There's a general planning process that each city has. So having local government first develop what their vision is important, such that then the vision can be funded. because if you're going after private equity, they want to see how this project will be affected, who's going to do it, and how you're going to pay back the money that they invest in. And so if you don't have a revenue stream, it's really difficult to be able to have the credit to raise private equity or even a municipal bond. The municipal bond has to be backstopped by a revenue source that the local government has. And that's one of the things that we've done with the sales tax measures in California. The sales tax are collected over a period of 20 years, but the projects are needed now. So what a lot of the counties then do is to bond against the future receipts of sales tax and then use that bulk money to build the projects now such that it generates the economic activities that you want to generate and the people are served today, and then you pay off the bonds over time as the sales tax revenues come in over time. So local government, I think, is a really good place. And my friend and I, Judy Ogunriola, I think he's on here somewhere. We were talking about, having been frustrated, like Ms. Akitela said, we're trying to work with federal and state. We were looking to see, what if we went to Oluyole South, for example, in Ibadan, and say, how can we work on the healthcare delivery system in the local government and create a plan for that and see how that works as a proof of concept, and then use that to replicate, successes across the plane. We have the very same opportunities in Nigeria to do that as it's done here. In the US, it's often said that the states are the laboratories of innovation for the country. And so each state is doing something slightly different that's advancing the game. And then the other states look over and say, oh, I want to do what Oregon is doing. I want to do what Illinois is doing because they seem to be getting a good return on their investment. And we see some of that in Nigeria, where some state governors are enterprising, they're doing some wonderful things, and everybody's saying, why can't your governor be like that governor? We tend to want to hold the federal government accountable for everything, but in fact, accountability goes all the way down to local government. And if your local government is doing the right thing at that local level, and you're going to see a market improvement in the lives of the people without having the federal government move a single kobo. So I think that's a perspective that I share, and I hope I answered your question, Ms. Ransom Kuti.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we're going to take two questions that, if you don't mind, Uncle Kome to answer them, and then we'll take the last two. Professor Grange, good evening, ma. Happy Thanksgiving. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to thank the presenter for a very well thought out and well presented presentation. While you were talking, I thought seriously about all the other institutions and support systems that were obviously also being developed pari passu the transportation system. I wonder how that came about, because you have told us, and you are in the center of the transportation system. But at the same time, there seems to have been some other developments around that, without which your own transportation system would not actually become productive. One of them, first of all, you mentioned security, and you mentioned power system, and medical care. Medical care is so important because people who come to invest will not be happy to invest in a country where their lives are taken for granted. They are not well looked after. So coming from the medical background, I believe that somehow we seem to have dropped the ball about our development system. We think more in terms of national development rather than local development. Whereas we should be thinking, yes, think globally, think nationally, but act locally. But one thing, though, that is not helping us here is that the leadership at the local level is still elected leadership, which tends to be subjected to all sorts of manipulations, and it doesn't therefore give us the best people to be in leadership position. How do we overcome that? Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to take one more question. Pastor Funke, please go ahead with your question. We've asked you to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking us through that trip. You know, I almost had a deja vu experience because many years ago, I think I was 13, when my granddad took us to, was it Disney World? And I saw the monorail. We went through Concord, and I remember that he was so excited and telling us faster than sound, this, telling us everything about the Concord. And today, even in Nigeria, those things are a dream away. And, you know, what you just did is just resuscitating those values. And I'm wondering what happened, because I saw that he was trying to engage them and talk about such transportation for Nigeria. Secondly, I was involved with I think 100 Days of Fashola and Engbeti project. You know, I just happened to be among the crew, you know, that worked on it. And I saw that in Lagos State, for example, they had traveled to, this time not to America, not to the UK, but they had gone to even African countries that seem to thrive. And one of the places, apart from that, they went to Asia. I remember, I think it was Miss Rhodes that did all the traveling and a lot of work, you know, lofty achievements where, you know, we saw the videos, the carving out of those projects, and we were looking forward, especially they said there'll be road for tricycles, road for, you know, people, pedestrians, and they put a date to it. But unfortunately, that has not happened. I think many years back, again, they had to look again at the transportation in Lagos, because how did I get to know that? We were trying to get a bus for the church, you know, a massive bus, and we had to go through people in government, and I just happened to know one of the advisors. So I asked him, and he told me that his son was actually on the project. His son actually worked with the UK government in transportation, and he had been brought here, and he started that bus project. You know, it was revived and it seemed to work. But you see, when the son saw a lot of interventions, you know, people were hijacking the projects and all that, what he did was that he abandoned it and went back to the UK. So what we are seeing right now is just a very stunted replica of what he did. And while you were talking, I just thought, you know, why will we not separate transportation, things like air travel, from governance? Because, you know, it shows that, you know, the ideas of, you know, what you just said, contracts, people seeing, you know, somebody bringing in the buses, somebody seeing, you know, bringing in tricycles and all that, and other transportation. People see it as their own personal gain, and they're not looking at the, you know, bigger picture. Lastly, I was at the House of Assembly. I think I was told to go there to represent my party, and we were talking about the local government and the future. And most of the projects that, you know, we're talking laissez-faire here, leave them alone, let the local government do the job before them. But I see there's a striving between the local government and the state government, and that is really stagnating, you know, especially what you just explained now. And until we have that leave alone project, then, you know, it looks like things have stagnated. And can I say that I lost my father in an accident around Ibadan, Abanlatus, and I lost my uncle also on the same spot. So it just shows that we're not doing what we should do in Africa. So how do we, accelerate, restore, and even enhance what we have at hand? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you could take those two together, and then we'll take the last two set of questions. I don't see any other hands up.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot there. And I think it all sort of, at least the way I heard it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the way I heard it, it all revolves around how do we execute, especially at the local level. Local government, like I mentioned earlier on, is where you affect the people directly. The city is who moves your garbage, who sweeps your street, and you see them, not the federal government in Abuja. It's the local government that does that. And so being able to engage local government in primary healthcare delivery, for example, I think is an important thing to keep in mind. Being able to engage local government in basic education and making sure the educational infrastructure is there, and also the local transportation system, just the local road network within the community, that those are serviceable such that people can get to and fro, go into economic activities, go into recreation, go into medical appointments, go into places of worship. Having the system that serves the people, I think, begins to elevate the well-being of the folks. And all of that then serve to create a workforce. Because I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of is when you're looking for, independent investments, foreign investments in our country, they're looking at the workforce. They're looking to see where this is the most important resource that any nation would have, is its people. And being able to then invest in our communities is to assure that we have folks that are ready to work. And so they're educated, they're healthy, and they can get around. So there's a commitment there that you can get out of local government. If we can, I think we have 774 local government areas in the country. That's a very interesting finite number. There's so many per state, but there is one where you live in, right? So you can sort of boil these issues down to where we waste a lot of time antagonizing and worrying and quarreling with the federal government and trying to get, point fingers at a person, the president or the president of the Senate and all those folks. But what about the local government chair and the local government committee members? What are they doing? Can we hold them accountable first, such that they deliver, especially now that there is autonomy where their resources doesn't have to be hijacked by a state governor? Let's make sure now is the time to make sure that those local government resources are expended in a strategic way to enhance that locality. If we can improve these locales one at a time, if we improve, a third of the 774 local government areas, that would advance our nation more drastically than anything we can get out of Abuja, I can assure you. So that's I think that's an opportunity that we all can pay attention to. What's happening in your local government? And it's not different from what people do here in this country. People go to city council meetings and they engage their mayor and council members on what's happening in their community and to hold them accountable for the resources that the city has. And so every Tuesday is a city council meeting somewhere that people show up to tell them what to do. Now, can I attest that it's always perfect and everything gets done right? No. It doesn't. It's an imperfect world, but at least to the extent that you're only taking one step back and not two steps back with every step forward, there is some progress that you're seeing there. So I think there's an opportunity that we have in just engaging the autonomy that local governments now have. In terms of overcoming the elected leadership, I think again the folks that become your local government chairs ultimately end up in state government and then become governor. If we begin to create the culture of accountability, and I know I sound Pollyannish, but I'm an eternal optimist. I just feel like when something good happens, there's a sudden well-being and feeling that people have that you want to have it happen again. And we just haven't seen a lot of good things happen to us in Nigeria. And I think that's a crying shame that we can begin to turn around one local government at a time. It doesn't have to be everything. Maybe one program, maybe one local government focuses on healthcare, another one focuses on education, and one focuses on transportation. Let's get one success and build on that to create a best practices that we can share those innovations and diffuse those across the country.
Thank you so much. We are going to take the last two hands. At TMEC, the work of the coalition is even more important now, so we really need to get cracking on that. So if I can have Mr. Adeleke, please go ahead with your question, and then we'll have King Charles also ask his question. Mr. Adeleke, or Lagbami, so please go ahead. I've asked you to unmute.
Yes, good evening to everyone. I will say this, every conversation on the African Leadership Series is always very brilliant. And I think this is one other brilliant conversation we're having right now. But my reservation is this. Yes, Professor Green spoke on some of the challenges that we may have in terms of this transportation hub we are talking about. And the speaker equally mentioned two things. We have the geography, we have the market to create a transportation hub. But my fear still remains this. We have been talking about this for so long, leadership and the political will to get things done. I will say one thing. Ethiopia has one of the best transportation hubs in Africa right now, whether we like to hear that or not. Somebody said while I chatted that Ethiopia had been in existence for 1,000 years. I don't really care how long you have been in existence. What is important is, do we have the political will to get things done? Because I know we have very brilliant people in Nigeria. They do practically the best things outside Nigeria. But most times we talk, but the political will is not there. So my comment still remains this. It is either a question or a comment. So I will just want to speak. How do we get the political leadership to start acting and doing what is right for us to move forward as a nation? That is just my contribution for now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Sir Charles. I've asked you to unmute, and please ask your question.
All right, KJ, thank you very much. Komen, thank you for articulating the power of California. I think, as everybody knows, I don't know, you're still the 5th largest economy in the world? Perhaps, somewhere around there. Yeah. Okay. I think everybody knows that you probably have one of the best transportation systems as well, between the Caltrain and BART and the rest of them. Now, since a lot of your function is based on sometimes municipal bonds, yes, and private investment, how can that translate to the system we have in Nigeria? Particularly, I'm thinking of states or cities like Lagos, for example, Warri, for example, Port Harcourt, Kano, where you have large populations of people that are not, they can't afford private transportation, especially today when fuel subsidy has been removed. There is a great opportunity here to perhaps move us away from depending on private transportation because people can't afford it in the first place because of cost. But now we have a chance to start investing in this type of transportation systems. I'm wondering if some of our government people come to people like you, for example, and ask for advice, ask for suggestions, ask for recommendations, and it seems like a missed opportunity. Is there Is there something that people like you are doing on the side to try and advise and recommend things to, if not Nigerian government, but state government? That's the first part. The second one is a very easy one. Are you planning to integrate, or have you already integrated AI into your operations? Thank you.
Well, let me answer the last question first, and then I'll come to the previous question about political will, because it ties to to the second question as well. Yeah, AI is, you can't help it. It's there. It's just part of our existence today. In planning, we're thinking about AI very seriously. It's still in its infancy because we have to have some integrity in the planning process. And so just using AI is not enough to be able to tell folks that you've had an objective planning process, but it does give you the capacity to do a little more than maybe we were able to do in the past, especially in terms of machine learning and using AI for augmented reality. And what I mean by that is, when you create a plan about the future, you really don't know how that future is going to happen. With AI and the capacity that we have with augmented reality, you can actually then create a model of your region and then move some factors around to show what it might look like in the future, to see what conditions will lead you to your stated goals. So there's that potential to advance the work in planning that we're contemplating with AI. I figure it's going to be well beyond my time in the workforce, because I'm an old guy now. But I think the potential is there to improve our decision-making process. Ultimately, that's what it's about, is having data-based decision-making to advance the work that we're trying to do on behalf of people. So that's about AI. The question about applying municipal bonds that we use to fund projects in California or across the US to Nigeria, I think that question is easy. Yes, you can do it, but will it happen? I don't see how it happens if the folks that you're going to be indebted to can't guarantee that they get their money back. So that really it's that simple. Municipal bonds are the debt instruments. You're borrowing against a revenue stream. If you cannot guarantee that the revenue stream will be there, or when the new governor comes in, that they will live up to the contract that had been signed before, then it really makes it very difficult. And I think that's one of the vagaries of working within the Nigerian political system, is a lack of certainty makes it very difficult for private equity and private capital to play in Nigeria. Because oftentimes a new governor comes in or a new president comes in and they don't recognize any contracts that were done by the previous administration. That never happens here. Well, I shouldn't say never. It doesn't usually happen here. When the state commits to a contract, it doesn't matter how many times you change government, that contract holds. Otherwise, it can be enforced in court. And so I think that's one fundamental thing to keep in mind in terms of where we don't have the discipline to be able to live up to attracting private equity. We have a lot of capital out there that's looking for places to play at very cheap rates, for that matter. But because we don't have the stability, you can't do the things that need to get done. There was mention about Ethiopia. Ethiopia just they didn't develop over 1,000 years ago. They were a very agrarian economy. There was intentionality in the last 20 years to be what they are today. We say in planning that hope is not a plan. So for us to just hope that something will happen, that's good for our faith, but it's not what we live by that are in government. You have to actually have a plan and execute the plan and have opportunities to make sure that you can check in to see if in fact the plan is working. So there is a feedback loop in the planning process. And then there's opportunities to correct things as necessary. So there is that aspect of it, is the political leadership that we have not been able to, hold them accountable, just to put it in simple terms. And to the extent that we can hold them accountable, yes, like the questioner said, we can talk about all of these things that are really lofty and high-minded that we could do. If we don't have the folks that can execute it at the political level, ultimately they don't get done. And you do need that kind of political leadership. That's the difference in the places that might be cited that are doing things right. It's because of political leadership. And I have to tell you, it's not a perfect scene in the US or in California. We don't always have imaginative political leadership at the city level or county level or state level or even federal level. But the structure of the system is such that it survives the worst of leaderships. And so there's that resiliency that we need to start to build. And that's why I'm big on beginning to implement things at the local government level and at the state level. The state governors are probably the most effective opportunities that we have in our country to get things done, because they have access to resources, and they also have an executive authority that can implement things that affect more people at a time than anyone else. And so being able to have an imaginative state governor, a state governor that actually understands what it means to leave a legacy behind, a state governor that understands that, ultimately they're going to leave power and people will look back and wonder what they've done. When you think of California, people think of Pat Brown, for example. They think of the things that he was able to do, that's a legacy for them. The water project that was built in California that allows water to flow. 2/3 of our water is in Northern California. 2/3 of the population is in Southern California. And so being able to get water from north to south is an engineering feat. That was something that a governor and leadership was able to get done. The University of California system, which is a well-renowned and foundational educational infrastructure that we have in California, and stood the test of time, was because somebody said it needed to be done in the face of opposition, really difficult opposition, but they stood their ground. Today, nobody can imagine California without UCLA and UC Berkeley and all the UCs that we have. So these are things that, folks need to think about what they leave behind when they're in government, whether it's local, state, or federal. We don't tend to think that way. And more than anything, we don't hold them accountable. We don't really hold them accountable enough for them to leave something behind. I'm not sure I covered all the questions that were asked, but I think I feel like just, as a matter of closing, I feel like we have the potential, going back to the beginning, we have the potential because we are blessed by where we have been placed on this planet, and the potential of our geography, our population, our diversity, and the diversity that brings about the huge human resource that we have, that even in the face of the lack of performance that we have right now, we can actually rebound and still take our rightful place in being that hub that we could be for the African continent.
Thank you. So you have an opportunity for a second closing remark with this follow-up question that just came up.
Okay.
In terms of sustainability and just really bringing the next generation into this planning system, can you speak a little bit about some of the strategies that you have in SAG, and with women too, incorporating women into the future of the organization?
Well, that allows me to brag about SCAG a little bit. You know, at SCAG, we are actually majority female organization. So we have about 200 people, and about 60% of our staff at SCAG are women. And on my executive team, there are 8 of us. I think 5 of the 8 are women. And so the role of women, I think, is very critical to the way forward. You know, 50% of population cannot be marginalized. In fact, that means you're leaving something behind as an economy if you're not engaging all of your capacity in the workforce. So when we think of workforce and we think about the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's along the lines of gender, but it's specifically in our area, in our region, it's also about racial equity, because a lot of things break along the lines of race and ethnicity in terms of advantages and disadvantages. So that's a very big program at SCAG. And again, for those who are curious, I would ask you go to scag.ca.gov and just run through the website. You'll see some of our resources there. In terms of the younger generation, I think we speak to that at SCAG quite a bit, because our work is about the future. You know, it's often said that I think the true sense of I can't remember the quote now, so I'm going to paraphrase it, but the true sense of life or good living is to plant a tree under which you don't expect to get shade. You know, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. So the trees that we plant today, we don't expect to sit under it. It's for people that are coming behind us that it provides shade. And for us to think in those ways, I think this is one of the things I'm passionate about in the line of work that I'm in, is to always think about what you're leaving behind, such that you can have a legacy. So we are engaging youth. In fact, I'm now talking to folks about creating a youth council for SCAG. So my board is made up of elected officials. They're all locally elected officials, mayors, supervisors, and councilmen and councilwomen. We meet monthly. The council meets monthly, and I've always wondered what it would be like to have a young people's council that represents my region, to sit at the table and hear them talk about what actually is important to them. And what we found in talking to young people, because we engage them on our scholarship programs, is they're very much particular about climate and equity. These are the big things that they deal with. And we're also finding that housing is probably one of the more important things that they want, because most of them can't afford to live in our region because of the high housing cost. So yes, we're working on making sure that we're speaking to young folks, and in the next year or so, we should have a youth council at SCAG that's made up of high school kids and maybe junior college students, such that they can speak to us about what their concerns for the future is, so we can include that in our planning process.
Thank you so much. One more, and I promise you this is the last. I know there's a lot of twin city agreements with some states and cities. Does SCAG have any twin city agreement or MOU with any of the state governments in Nigeria or in Africa where there is?
No, we don't. And it's, you know, it's something we hadn't thought about, and it's an oversight. I think something we should think seriously about. It's always very difficult as a government agency to travel under the auspices of the work that we do. But we do travel. We go to Europe. We go to Asia. I think you should begin to see trips to Africa as well, and those bilateral agreements will become one of the outcomes of those travels. And why is that important? I think what it does is it connects you to you know, a different entity outside of your sphere, and you begin to watch each other grow and do things together, and also provides opportunities for exchanges. We've done intern exchanges, student exchanges with universities in Korea and China in the past, but that was a while back. We haven't done that lately. And so that's the kind of opportunities that I think these bilateral agreements will create. And I hope that we'll get to doing that in the coming years.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take some announcements. I believe you had your closing remarks. I'll take some announcements before I bring up our president to close. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening, and happy Thanksgiving to my folks in North America. I hope you enjoy your turkey and many more reasons to be thankful. And also, we meet here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Nigerian time, and that is 8 a.m. California time. So you had to wake up early to do this. I appreciate you. 11 a.m. Eastern time. And the year is coming to a close. So we have a couple of sessions left on NLS before we close for the holidays, and then we resume again in January. So we just ask everyone to continue to watch this space. Join us every Thursday. We have some big announcement coming up, and the flyers, please share the flyers with everyone that you can. And this was a very important conversation. This is part of national development. These are the conversation and the information we need to have to begin to build our communities. Transportation is a critical component of nation building. So thank you again for coming, for joining us this evening. We're glad you were here, and we'll see you again next week, same Zoom link, same time. And I had also put in the chat room a link for you to join Africa Leadership Group. I'll repost it. So please fill that form. We'll be in touch with you, and you can get information about what we're doing, the different initiatives that we're working on, IOI mentorship program, School of Leadership, Community Development Initiative, and Feed a Neighbor, Feed a Nation. We had one outreach on Sunday to the elderly community in the Agile Lekki axis. Was a great time. We reached 200 families in partnership with International Energy Services. So there's a lot that we're doing, but we can only do it together. And we're working with Auntie Yemisi also on this coalition that we've really spoken about here on holding local government accountable, and some of the effort and work that local government really needs to do. So we invite you to come on board, engage with us. There's a lot of work, but we can only do this together. So thank you again for joining us this evening. God bless you. God bless Nigeria. Over to you, Mr. President.
Well, thank you very much, Kome. I'm really grateful to you for spending so much time with us and all the work you're doing in California, and for representing, first of all, Ibadan so well, and then secondly, Nigeria. I'm also an Ibadan boy, proudly so, born in Jericho Nursing Home a few days ago. So I drank Ibadan water. I went to Ibadan schools. I just don't have the tribal marks, you know. So thank you so much for representing us so well. And I wish you the very best. One of the things that you spoke about was the role of the diaspora in trying to really come back home to Nigeria and help us one way or the other. We need a lot of traction there. Olu was reminding me of the story of one of my mentees, like a nephew to me, who went to school in Canada, and he studied some form of transportation management and how to plan for transportation years ahead. And he came back to Nigeria, and he couldn't find work because, first of all, we couldn't understand in Nigeria what he had studied. And secondly, there was no government department in Nigeria that was doing transportation planning. Can you believe that? So they just didn't know where to fit him in. Eventually, he worked in the ports, the new port in Lagos,
So.
So.
Well, thank you for the privilege. Really appreciate the time together and look forward to connecting. And there's nothing Jumoke asked that I wouldn't do.
All right, Jumoke, over to you. You're in trouble.
It's recorded.
It's recorded. And we're going to tell Donald Trump what you said.
All right.
Thank you again.
All right, God bless.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jumoke, thanks so much. All right. Thank you,
my
Awele.
regards to
Thank
the
you so much
family.
for being on the program.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving,
North
everyone.
America.
And God be thanked all over the world, including America. Thank you.
Amen.
Jumoke, thank you very much. God bless you.
And God bless you too. Good night.
Good night.
Again next week. Good night, everyone. See you again next week. Same channel, same speed.
Awesome.